They're precious, though. Paradox theory. He's not too far from the doctrine of the Trinity, actually, and we'll have to, at another point, have that conversation with him.
First summer sermon.
His first summer sermon, exactly. What is the doctrine of the Trinity? But it is good to be here, and it's always good to have the children. We are planning a special service where they will be in leadership on May 22nd, so I hope you'll mark your calendars for that. Beth and Karen and Gail and Sue Ellen have been working really hard with the kids, they will have an opportunity. They'll be greeting at the door, they'll be participating in reading scripture, they will be helping to serve communion, taking the offering. They will have a special story to share as part of the sermon time, so they're very excited. And if you grew up in church, you remember how cool it was to sort of be in front and doing things in front of the adults. So I hope that you will encourage them and be present with us on May 22nd. I'll be out of town next week. Danielle Cox will be here preaching. It's Pentecost Sunday, so we'd love to celebrate that with you. I'm going to be in New York at the Grace Baptist Church. My cousin Michelle is a member there, and I was invited to be their Women's Day speaker, so I'll get to spend some time with my cousin, and her father lives in the area. He's my dad's younger brother, so we will have a little mini horde reunion over the weekend. And so it's always nice when your family feels confident enough to put your name in the hat to go and speak. So I will be in New York next weekend. And as Bob said, I will be the baccalaureate speaker at Eureka College on Friday evening. So I got a busy weekend ahead, but pray for me. And I'm really excited to be there as Tammy and Angela are graduating. Bruce Folks is a longtime friend, who's the chaplain at Eureka. So lots of good stuff going on. This scripture today, which Joy read so beautifully. Joy, I think you always get the assignment when we have a longer text. But before we get into the sermon, I want to get, well, it was really part of the sermon, I want to get into some historical background. This woman, this slave girl, who the Bible tells us is demon-possessed, and the Christians thought she was demon-possessed, but the Romans thought that if you had some sort of clairvoyant ability, some sort of fortune-telling ability, that the gods of Mount Olympus, the Roman or the Greek gods, whichever set of mythology you want to believe, you had some sort of favor. Remember, the Roman Empire doesn't care what you worship or how you worship. They just believe that civilized people have religion. Civilized people believe in something. This young woman earned a lot of money because she would go about sort of telling fortunes for people. And Paul is, interestingly enough, the text tells us, very annoyed because she's coming behind them using language that the Christians have sort of co-opted. A year or so ago, we did a whole series about the use of the word Lord and the use of the word Jesus is Lord. The Caesars of the Roman Empire would have been described as being lords and gods. And so the same language that we now use for Jesus, to say Jesus is Lord, they would have said Caesar is Lord. Paul is really concerned that this young woman walking behind them saying, these people are servants of the Most High God, he knew that what she meant was wrong, that they were servants of the Roman emperor. Paul understands this as only Paul can because he is himself a Pharisee, a pretty good rhetorician. Paul is just really concerned about how these words are being used. He doesn't want the words that he's being used for the gospel to be confused with anything else. He calls the spirit to come out of her, and of course her owners are now concerned that their money-making scheme has gone awry. And they accuse him of basically treason, of creating problems along with the Jews. Of course, we all know that this is how Jesus was ultimately killed because he was considered to be treasonous against Rome. He was creating upset. And so Paul is jailed because Paul has disrupted this economic situation with this young woman who's running around being clairvoyant, telling fortunes, And Paul has now created a situation that lands him in jail. It's not a pretty sight. He's beaten just as Jesus was beaten, with the same kind of rods with sort of cat o' nine tails, leather and pieces of metal on the ends. He's bound up in the stocks. Their hands and feet were bound either with chains or with wooden stocks, as they demonstrate to the children. And Paul and Silas are amazingly calm. Many of us would be upset if we were put in jail for any reason. I'm mindful of that scene in the Jersey Boys movie where the police show up at the state fair where they're performing and cart the Four Seasons off to jail for failing to pay a hotel bill there the previous year. Two of the Four Seasons, as you know, Tommy and Nick, were in and out of jail all the time. They're chilling out. Somebody's going to come with bail money. They have no concern about it. Bob Gaudio, on the other hand, has not been in jail. Neither has Frankie Valli. They are freaking out because there are these big, mean people who are in the jail and they just simply don't know how to handle it. Most of us, I dare say, would be in that category if you found yourself in jail and didn't think that you should be there. You would be out of your mind and beside yourself with anxiety. But Paul and Silas, actually, in other texts where this story is told, are singing, just like there's another story where Peter and some others land in jail. And their response to this being jailed is just to be calm, trusting that God is going to work everything out. They aren't blaming anyone, they aren't crying foul, they are simply accepting their fate and trusting that God is going to work these situations out. What they do believe is that God will work it out, but what they don't yet understand is how God will use this particular situation as an opportunity for them to share the gospel. I've entitled this sermon, Shaking Our Foundation. And you might think that I'm just talking about the jail cell, the actual cell, the earthquake that does literally shake the foundation. But what is happening here is far more than a physical release of some men who are in prison. It's far more than the jailer's fear that somehow, because they've been released by some supernatural power, that they will be held accountable. That's why the jailer feels that he needs to kill himself, because he has allowed these prisoners to be released, and he'll have to account for that. Sometimes there are certain things that happen in our lives for which we know that we're going to be held accountable based on some established rules, some established traditions, and some established practices. We understand the discipline in our homes that we grew up in. There are certain times when you disobeyed your parents, and you knew for sure that if you didn't follow certain rules and your mother or father found out about it, you would face certain consequences. There are certain rules and laws that if we disobey them today, we understand that we will face certain consequences. I recently got a parking ticket on Ellis Avenue in Chicago. I had to pay $50. I could choose not to pay the ticket, but you know what happens in Chicago now. The price escalates and you get a second letter and the charge goes from $50 to $100. There are some rules that simply are what they are, and they are in place. There are other constructs of society. There are other social norms and social rules that are set as if they were law, but have a very binding effect on us in any case. There are certain realities within our society that certain people have spent a lifetime fighting against. It used to be pretty normal that you could discriminate against black people and not get in trouble for it. You could use certain language. You, in fact, had rules that said only black people could use that water fountain and white people could use that water fountain. There are certain rules that went against, certain laws that actually discriminated against people of same-sex orientation. There are still states where there are books on the laws on the books today. There are certain norms that we used to have about church, that women wore hats and gloves and dresses, And one just wasn't considered to be a proper lady unless you came to church attired in a certain way. I look back at old pictures of myself and my siblings at Easter, and we have on hats and gloves and dresses and crinoline skirts. My brother always wore a tie. You wouldn't think of entering church without hosiery on. I was at a workshop yesterday, and my mother was having problems with the fact that the young woman who was presenting as part of the workshop, her skirt was very short, and she had on no hosiery, and my mother just thought this was wrong. Just wrong. Now, in today's world, there are lots of things that we would have considered foundational that simply don't apply either because they were wrong to begin with, such as legalized segregation or legalized discrimination against people of same-sex orientation. There are things that we no longer do because we have come to the decision that they are simply wrong. We've come to the understanding, and society has taken action to change certain things. Other things like gloves and hats, although Ollie has on a beautiful derby hat this morning. Or women not wearing pants in church. I'm really concerned because I'm going to Mother Owen's church this afternoon. And I'm thinking I may need to change my pants and put on a skirt. But there are other places, other mores in the world where it's a little harder for us to shift because it's not so much what people think is wrong, but it's what people really believe in their hearts is right. The jailer's foundations were shaken in a way that goes far beyond the building. It goes far beyond the chains that fell off of Paul and Silas. Paul's act of grace, by simply saying, "It's okay, God loves you," allows the jailer a space in which he can look around to see that because those foundations have been shaken, he is now free to take a different course. He's free to make a different decision. How exciting! How exciting in that day and age for him to understand that, number one, nothing was wrong, even though those prisoners had been free, that they had made a choice to stay. And because they made a choice to stay, not only was he not going to be in trouble, but they were offering him a different choice that would change the rest of his life. Because that foundation was shaken, he had the opportunity to see a different way of seeing the world and a choice to now follow a different path. Many of us have seen different sets of revolutions and changes in our lifetimes. It's always the case that younger generations fight for new ways of doing and being things. Younger generations are always the one who question what exists. They question the foundations. And as they get older, as we get older, the things that we fought for then become our comfort zone, our norm. Remember when Pass It On was this radical song in church because they sang it with a guitar? Pass It On is now in the hymn book. Thomas Dorsey sang and wrote this wonderful song, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand." Thomas Dorsey was a blues musician named Georgia Tom. The devil's music is now in the church, the people said. Precious Lord is now in the hymn book. One of my grandma's favorite songs. Oh, Happy Day, Edwin Hawkins. When I was a little kid, that song came out on a 45. Everybody loved it. There were women in my grandfather's church who walked out the church when the choir would sing, Oh, Happy Day. 40 years later, 40 years after Precious Lord, once again, somehow the devil's music is back in the church. Drums would never have been allowed a couple of generations ago. As a woman, I wouldn't have been able to stand in this pulpit a few generations ago. And even more recently, as I'm always commenting, because I'm so grateful that I can wear pants to church, I wouldn't be received as a woman certainly not in pants, and ministers would have been really expected to wear very heavy, uncomfortable ministerial robes. There are all sorts of little mini revolutions that occur throughout our lives. And once we get over one revolution, the thing that was so violently different at the beginning becomes part of our new norm. Every time our foundations are shaken, it opens up a path to make a different choice, to accept a different new normal. Society and human culture depends on the shaking of foundations every so often. There are some things that will always be firm and true: the love of God, the compassion that we must show to one another. But hopefully, there are times when we realize that the things that we've been clinging to so tightly are really the things that are keeping us enslaved, and that if we allow ourselves to be shaken up just a little bit, like the jailer, instead of being afraid of what will happen when our beloved traditions and our beloved symbols make room for new ways of being and new ways of doing, we will see that the choice that's before us can be to embrace change even as we hold on to things that we love. In essentials, unity, but in non-essentials, liberty. In all things, love. Paul and Silas did well to seize this moment of shakenness, this moment of concern and anxiety, and reassure the jailer that just because what he thought was most important was literally crumbling around him, that it represented an opportunity to engage God in a new way, that it represented an opportunity for him and his family to live a different kind of life. What kinds of things do you carry with you? What kinds of things might we be willing to let go? When we're shaken by change, are we afraid of what the change means? When we're shaken by change, can we look up and see the path forward to something that perhaps is more inclusive, that is more exciting, that is more inviting? We are history, children are destiny. It's more important to me that the children understand than that you understand, actually. It's more important to me that young families can see a place where their children can grow and be fed and that they can raise their children. There needs to be comfort and peace for all of us in the things that we love and that are comforting to us, but in order to make room for new and for future, our foundations are going to be shaken continuously. And because our foundation is not in human ritual, but because our foundation is actually in the Spirit of the living God and in the Word of God, I really believe that we can withstand these shakings. We can withstand these things that would otherwise cause us to tremble and fear. And we can look up and see that perhaps God is simply making room for more, that God is making room for new, that God is making room for the future. And once we can see the reality of what's possible with God, all we need to do is tether ourselves to our faith in God, trusting that even though the ground shakes, the path will still be open for all who believe and all who desire to come to him. Hang on. Hold firm. There will be changes, there will be things that are new in all of our lives and certainly in the life of our church. But I pray that your faith will be your firm foundation. And even though the walls rattle, the windows shake, you will see the way forward for change, inclusion, and hope for our future. Amen.